Go ahead. Got it. Okay. Um, so would you like to go ahead or should I
Yeah,
introduce or yeah,
I can go ahead. Yeah,
go ahead. Yeah.
awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome. On behalf of Carib's Network and Whistle Caribbean, we welcome you to this conversation with a very esteemed guest. We're so fortunate to have her give up some of her time to chat with us today. I would like to formally introduce you to the Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel. Welcome.
Thank you, the Dr. Nicole Grimes. It's nice to
My
be in this
fellow
conversation.
my fellow Trini,
Yes,
fellow Trini in service.
yes. Great to be here.
Wonderful.
Thank you for
So
being with us. Yeah.
given the work and the scope of Business Juve, right? This it's a 12-week sequence that Whistle and Caribis Network have curated. We have devise this experience for people who are sitting at this juncture in their life where like they have an idea, they want to get more involved in some way, have some sort of impact in their community, notably the Caribbean community from wherever in the world they are.
Mhm.
So we're inviting them to learn from people, inspiring folks like yourself, and hopefully plant little seeds of inspiration, nuggets of wisdom so they can get started on their journey, whatever that is. And being able to speak to you today, provides us this incredible opportunity to kind of like get into that brain and understand and learn so much from you because you bring a breadth and a depth of wisdom, from just your work in education, and as a design thinking expert. So we want to kind of just dive right in, help everyone get to know you and understand who you are, what you do, um, and how you're changing the world one day at a time, given your role and all of your work so far. So you have a background in industrial design and an MBA and a doctorate. So tell us a little bit about just your educational experience, and how did you get into this space? Like what led you to design and education to this point that you are in your career?
So we don't have enough time to talk about all of this, the twists and turns on this path. But I did my undergrad in industrial design in a kind of like an arbitrary way. I wanted to study where you are in New York and apply to all of these New York schools, Pratt and Parsons, and a couple other places, and got in and then saw the cost. And my parents kind of laughed me out of the room and said, okay, you can study anywhere that you want in the world if we don't have to pay for it. And then, so that set me on a path where I was looking for somewhere to study. And I think I got interested in industrial design because of what I saw was going on in Parsons and Pratt. But actually, I ended up studying industrial design in Brazil, because there was the opportunity to study there, at no cost. And so I did undergrad in industrial design. I did a master's in business education, not business education, master's in business administration, because design is very connected to business. So I returned to Trinidad after I did industrial design, taught and ran a business. And so when I needed to do a master's, business seemed to be the obvious place to go. I actually did consider a master's in education because I used to do endless reading about education, but really I was interested in business.
Mm.
And then I was teaching at the University of the West Indies. Um, Needed a PhD to continue my career, as an academic. And then at that point, I said, okay, I guess I'm a designer and I'm going to do this PhD in design. And so I got a scholarship to come to North Carolina State University, where I actually came back to teach. So that's where I am today. So I mean, there've been a lot of twists and turns. It took a gazillion years, But yeah, I am today an assistant professor at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and my area is design studies. So I am in the part of the university where we really think a lot about design philosophy, design methods. We ask questions about, okay, how do we design? Who gets the right to design? Why do we design? Do people from different backgrounds design differently? So it's really a very philosophical space that I'm in at the College of Design. And we also ask this question about, if not designers, who else designs? And that's where some of the questions related to education come, because in some of my own research, I've been kind of exploring maybe like using design processes in STEM education, or working with young children, and so that's where I've been in some of that's where I've brought in some of the education space, education work into design. And then the other area that I'm in is design for social change, and these are some other conversations I have where I try to just get any and everybody to think, oh, actually, I do have some agency and control over this world that takes place around me, and I can design the world that I want. So I give a lot of workshops where I'm trying to get people to think about what is it that they want, try to express it clearly, and then figure out what's the design process to get them there. So that was a lot of talk, but that's kind of what I do.
No, that was great. Like based on the literature that I've seen out there, you would describe your research or your work as emancipatory research. So you kind of lend, you gave us a peek into like, yeah, I'm really focused on who has access to being able to be a designer, who's in a room, how are we teaching, young people to be a part of this process and like have agency and recognize this is a pathway, right? This is something that I can experience and have be a part of my life. I want to take a step back really quickly and talk about like, so we're just throwing out these terms, designer, design thinking, right? So tell everyone, like fundamentally, you're a designer. What does that mean? What are you designing? And who are the kinds of students that you have as a professor? And then I want to kind of jump into like, if you could talk about what is your view on design and the impact on society, specifically children, and like what led you to deciding I want to work with young people and do workshops with them and talk to them more?
Okay, you're gonna have to remind me of some of these questions,
No,
right?
I got it. No worries. I got it. The three-part question. I know.
Okay, so the first question, okay, I call myself a designer, and what I design has changed many times over the last 20 to 30 years. So when I was an industrial designer, I used to design furniture and I would design objects. I designed shoes for a little while. I worked in handicrafts, so I would work with other people who design, and I would come up with an idea like a handbag or jewelry, stuff like that. But I actually I describe my design practice now as dematerialized. I don't design objects anymore, right? I design, sometimes I work with cities to help them design programs. So they will design the social programs, but I'm like a design coach. So the same methodology that I used to use to design furniture, we're going through and we're designing programs and policies, and so they're able to use these design skills in thinking about how to serve the public. And then I am a designer, but a lot of what I do today is write. So I don't know, maybe I design books, I design theory, maybe because it's that because I said I'm in that philosophical space. I write a lot about these questions of who gets the right to design, because traditionally design is taught, whether intentionally or not, traditionally it's taught in a very Euro-American centric way. And some of the questions that I ask in the research that I do is, well, okay, what happens if non-Europeans and non-Americans are designing? Is it that we can't design if we're from the Caribbean, or if we're from I don't know, Bangalore, India, or if is it that we can't design? I actually, like, many years ago, directly challenged a big design academic who said design takes place in industrialized countries. And I wrote this long article. I said, well, are you saying that if you're not from an industrialized country that you can't design? So these are the kinds of questions that I ask a lot, right?
Did you
What
get
if you,
did you
what's
get the
that?
sense it was coded language for like third world versus first world? Like what was
Yeah,
that
there's
what
a lot of that. There and sometimes it's intentional, and sometimes people don't realize that they're doing it, that the design is framed as something that happens you are in New York, right? So if you live in New York, you can be a designer. If you live in Milan, Italy, or maybe Stockholm, Sweden, these are places that are kind of pitched as design centers. But there has to be somebody, this is the focus of my research, right? Or my work, right? About what if you don't live in those places, right? What does design look like if you are in Nevis, very small island, or, what does a design curriculum look like? Actually, before I left UWE, we created a whole we never got it passed, but I'll tell you what we created. We created a certificate for artisans to get like a design and a higher level design certificate that would have been like a design and a business certificate for people who were in handicrafts in the Caribbean. And we were trying to figure out how we would design this remote program that could take place throughout like the OECS, and maybe at the end of the program there would be some kind of like exhibition and trade show, but it was really supposed to be this higher level certificate so that people in those kinds of contexts could understand design and manufacturing processes, and then apply that to products that they wanted to develop and sell, right? So, if you go to design school, you can feel like design cannot happen in rural places. Actually, it does. Everybody designs, everybody has these capabilities. And a lot of the work that I do with quite a few people is about shining a light on design practices outside of, I suppose, the global north, right? Or outside of those big metropolitan areas, so that we could see, oh, people really do practice design all over the world and in many different ways. So it doesn't have to be one design process that we're using. There are many design processes that we use all over the world. And I forgot all the other million questions you asked me. So you have to bring me back on track.
No, you're totally fine. Like this nicely segues into the second question, which is, so you clearly have kind of outlined why design is so important to you, why, like the work that you do in terms of like standing on the podium and screaming from the rafters, like, hey, like design beacons are everywhere. There's not like one or two particular beacons where this can happen. It's like, and it's accessible to you. I want you to be aware of it, know about it, embrace it, right? So tell us the story of like how your time at UWE kind of like, I'm assuming, evolved into creating these workshop experiences for youth in Trinidad.
Yeah, so at UWE, I was trying to figure out again, how could we create a very Caribbean centric design practice that didn't make people feel that they had lost out because they didn't get to go to wherever, right? And so there were lots of like little experiments along the way that got me to these workshops. Like there was one project that we did at UWE that was really exciting, where we worked with a primary school in Mayaro, Guayari. Yes. So I think, I don't remember if it was an RC or an EC school. I think it might have been the RC, Roman Catholic primary school. And we partnered children at that school with university students. and the children drew characters and narrated stories to the university students. And then the university students, who were design students, then took the children's characters and created storybooks from them. It was like a really exciting project. And we made like a 12 storybooks based on these drawings that the children did. And that maybe kind of it's not directly tied in a research sense, but it is still tied to the work that I did later on, because it really is a story about empowerment and agency, where and emancipation, where these children were able to clearly articulate, these are the stories that I'm interested in. And then they had the power to direct what the university students were doing, right? So that was like a small experiment that I started while I was still at UE. Then I left UE, and my PhD research now was also a workshop with children. And that took place in Moruga. So you see, I like rural places, right?
Yeah.
Moruga, for people who are, well, Mayaro first and then Moruga. These are very rural places in Trinidad. Maybe like at least 3 hours away from the port, from Port of Spain. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Very
Yeah,
far.
the thing is, if you want to make change, but if you want to do some things and you do it in the capital, those are easy places to do it.
Yeah.
And maybe that still looks like New York or Milan or whatever, right? And yeah. So I said I wanted to work in places that are a little bit more remote, and where challenge those people to really, again, see that they have more power than maybe they might be hearing that they have. So that workshop with those children in Moruga, they had to identify problems that they saw within their village, right? So we sat down. Again, it's a question of agency and empowerment and emancipation. So they figured out, okay, these are the problems in they worked with school and village. These are the issues that we're concerned with. And then they designed the solutions to these issues that they wanted to see change. And then they spent a little time, like maybe interviewing adults in the area, and then presenting their solutions to the adults, right? So that was the second workshop. And in that workshop now, I had a little bit more theory, because I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, and was able to really see, I was now able to really kind of understand the theory that I didn't have before, but I still had the questions. Now I had the theory, real theory about agency.
And the language.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so that workshop was very Freirean, and the goal I could express more clearly, which was about getting students to see the world around them and to understand that they have the agency to make change. So life doesn't just happen to them. They can influence this world. They could see the oppression and the oppressive forces, but they have the power to change it, right? And I'll actually say, so that was in 2017. I did that second workshop with children, but I'm using that methodology to today. And okay, now I'm supposed to plug my book and say, and my book is
well, I'm going to get there. I want to get there, because I love the last part of what you just shared, where you talking about like these early experiences where like the messaging was very clear, like you have agency, you have the ability and the power. And you're talking about work with secondary level students, and now obviously you're a professor working with, right, university students.
Actually, let me push back. Not secondary level students. Those two projects I described for you
primary. Primary. Yes, you did say primary.
So, I mean, very young children. So, I want them to get the message from very young. Oh, I changed the world. The world doesn't just happen to me. I design the world that I want to be in. So yeah, so I worked with young children.
Yes. And now you work with adults. But so
Now
my
I
question,
work with adults, but I'm using the same methodology where
so my
yes,
oops,
sorry.
sorry. No, you go.
No, I was just going to say I teach a class called Contemporary Issues in Art and Design, but
Okay.
it is really about the students being able to see this world around them, because a lot of us go through the world and we can't really see clearly maybe oppressive forces, or we can't see what are the things that are holding us back. And so this class is about people seeing the world very clearly, being able to understand how is this world either supporting me or holding me back. And then what do I do next? You know, because okay, you have to see it. And then because we're in design, we could then imagine something new. And then designers have the superpower of being able to take this new thing and figure out what's the path to get there. Because not everyone can imagine something beyond what exists, but that's the superpower that we have as designers. And so I try to foster that.
Yes, taking that leap. I want to zoom in, really point
Yes.
to this word methodology.
Mhm.
Because we're both super nerdy academics, we know how loaded that word is. And it's not the way that the traditional person might use it. So I want to kind of simplify it and just focus on the root word method. So you mentioned that there are methods that you use to kind of walk people through this ideation process, right? Like getting from some point A to point B. And I imagine this is kind of like what your classes, you're right, are based on, your university courses, at least today, is based on, like taking people on this journey from like the starting point of like, you can do this. Could you tell us a little bit about what these methods are, or what this experience looks like or feels like in the simplest forms?
So where we start, I mean, generally, I guess designers start off with trying to understand the problem or the context, right? My courses are very much focused on like oppression and equity. And so when we're trying to understand the problem, we have to really ask ourselves, where are the oppressive forces? And where are people not equal or not receiving equal rights to something, or equal access to something? And so that's what we use to frame how we are understanding the problem. So we're understanding the problem. I'll give you an example. The problem might be, we're talking about education. So the problem might be that people don't, okay, we think that education is mediocre in whatever land X, on whatever island, right? We can't just stick with that kind of general question of, oh, education is just so. We will sort of really dig and see, well, okay, do people of different identities and backgrounds, do they get the same access to education? What is one thing that allows you more access to education than something else? Or sometimes we actually use the sustainable development goals and say, well, okay, if we look at all of these sustainable development goals, which goals are we not meeting in this situation, right? And it could be that, okay, there's one of the goals that is no poverty, and somehow if you are experiencing poverty, you don't get education, right? And so we understand the problem. That's a first phase. Then we define what part of the problem we want to work with, because there are, the thing about design is that we can't solve the whole problem, but what makes it successful is that we just take like little pieces of the problem, we work on that, and then when we've dealt with that, we can go back into the problem again and find another little piece. So we try to figure out what little part of the problem we want to address. And that's in some design processes, they talk about the define phase. So we do that. We define what it is we want to solve. Then we go into the dreaming phase, right? Actually, there's another step that I could put in there where we're like just kind of really critical of what already exists, right? But then we go into the dreaming phase where we're trying to imagine what is perfect, what is a utopia, what could be a radical new way of addressing this issue. And we then go into that. That's what gets us into the ideation phase. At some point, we create some criteria for evaluating which of these designs we want to test out. Then we go into the prototyping phase where we make some element of that design. And then we talk with people and we get a lot of feedback from people, right? And then sometimes we go back into the design process again. Actually, for like one of my classes, students have to work with public, and I'm Trini, like you are, and they are unfortunately working with the public in Trinidad. Not unfortunately, but unfortunately for them. But it could be a heartbreaking process. They'll do this fantastic design, and then they'll take it to the people in Trinidad via Zoom, and then someone will say, that can't work here in Trinidad, you know. and the poor student is destroyed. But really, that's part of the process that we're working with, that it's not the designer who controls this design. It's that we do this design in collaboration with, in response or in collaboration with real people. And we get feedback from real people, and they don't have to make us feel good. They just have to tell us how this design is going to work for them, and then we respond to that. So I guess that's the kind of process that we use.
I love that. We like, this seems to be a recurring point with us too. Our previous guest, Corinne, founder of Ascania Chocolates, we were talking about how she started her chocolate company in Haiti, and she was talking about, I don't even like chocolate, but she talked about how, like, just talking to people and figuring out where there was a need, rather, right? That engagement with the local community and landing on this idea to move in that direction. I feel like it's so important for people to recognize this distinction between, I have a passion project, or I just have a hobby or something I like to do, versus I want to be intentional about doing something with this idea that's actually going to have impact or help someone, help people, because otherwise it's not going to go anywhere, right? It's just going to be something you do at home for yourself. You're gonna make this,
and when I used to work with craftspeople, that was always our issue, that as someone in handicrafts, you'd be hearing all the time, oh, this is your art and you love it and this and that, and you make it because you feel it makes you feel good, but really you need to be for you to really be successful, you have to be interpreting some need that you're hearing from people, or you have to certainly be listening to people's feedback when they give it to you, right?
Absolutely. Like, I can give a simple example of that. There are so many like women founders and creators I know who like love jewelry, so like they started making their own jewelry, and that's led to them starting a jewelry company. And from just based on people's responses, their questions from pop-up experience, etc., like the number one question that people ask is like, they want to know about the materials, the metals used, right? To know if they're allergic to anything that you're producing. And number two, so overlooked all the time, do you have clip-ons? No one is making jewelry that's clip-on jewelry for all these women who don't want to, do you know what I mean? They don't want these heavy pieces of jewelry or in their ears. And I'm like, it's a wide open market, and like no one is really tapped into it. I see it all the time. I hear it all the time. So I think, to your point, like, yes, this idea of like part of your methodology, this experience of this connection with the community, with people, to get feedback from them, and then kind of go back into the loop, right? Go back into this design thinking loop to inform how you're making decisions about moving your design to the next stage, whatever that idea is. It could be to like literally make something tangible, or it could be to provide a service. It doesn't matter. As you said, it's the same steps along the way that we're inviting people to be a part of.
Yes, definitely the same process. And I've had this discussion with students pretty often, that design is such a fluid field. You could be trained in graphic design and end up as a footwear designer 10 years later, or but you know, or you are designing games now, but you really used to design something else 10 years ago. But it is really just important for you to understand this process, right? What are you trying to do? You're trying to understand the issue. You're trying to be responsive to, well, identify a need, generate a lot of ideas, creatively, right? And attractive, innovative, you know, all of that is part of the brief. And then get feedback from people and be responsive to that feedback, you know. I've found with some people that I work with, we are trained to defend an idea. And so they'll say, okay, I designed this. And then when they get feedback, they're like, but this is really good because blah, 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 blah. And they'll tell us all the reasons it's good. And so I have to, in some of the classes, I have to kind of train people to, or well, untrain them in that defensiveness to say, actually, you're not coming here to defend an idea. You can present your idea, but you're not defending it. Actually, it's a better design strategy to bring that idea and let people pull it apart, right? So like I often when I'm designing these programs and with people, we'll take an idea into a session, but it's a sacrificial idea where we know that people are going to just shred this idea. And we're hoping that together in that forum, they're going to help us put back the idea together in a way that makes sense to them, right? Because that's part of the design process. You know, I could go in and I could defend, and I could say, this is a fantastic idea and you all better buy it because it's good. Or I could understand that part of the process is you could tell me it's a bad idea now during the development phase, and then we could put it together, put it back together again in a better way later on.
I love that. By any chance, do you do independent consulting work? Like, do any brands or companies like hire you to do this kind of work and guide them through this process?
So because I'm in social design, I work with cities, right? And you know, yeah, so like I worked with a city last year, or this year, I don't remember. I worked with them for 9 months, and we were looking at homelessness within that city and how could we create some programs that would support people who are unhoused, right? And so so we actually had that process where we designed some programs that we thought were fantastic to support unhoused people. And then we went into a shelter for unhoused people, and we had that conversation where they're like, you know, we don't actually even need that. You know, they were like really blunt with us, and they said, you're actually designing stuff for problems that don't really exist. We had done all of our formal research and we thought that we knew the problems. But when we had the feedback session with them, they actually said, well, in our community, that's not really an issue. And your idea is nice and flashy and pretty, but it's not going to serve us. And so then what happened is exactly that way. They pulled it apart, and then we kind of reassembled the idea together in that session and came up with some better solutions. So I work with cities. That's a short answer to what you just asked.
I love the idea that you mentioned the word research so many times, because it's such an important part of this journey, right? Like in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
How we talked about, like, you have to do your homework, like understand what's out there already. And of course, that lens that opens you to learning things like the term is unhoused now, right? We don't say homeless anymore. It just made me think about that. Like, that's such an important part of like understanding the space that you're trying to be a part of to begin with. But just in terms of the actual research, your actual research, like you have so many publications about your work in general, your work locally in the Caribbean in terms of youth education. Could we talk about, like, if you could summarize like the overall, like the kind of work your publications have covered, and then take us into like this new book that you have, and like what can the user, I mean, a reader rather, expect from this new piece of work, this new publication?
Okay. You ask these complicated questions, Nicole, multi-layered questions, and I have a short memory.
Sorry.
But so when I looked across, I'm actually preparing a tenure package. So I had to look at the different publications I've been working on. And sometimes it will seem like they are kind of all over the place, like in a lot of different areas. But there is a thread that runs through everything. And the thread that runs through everything is about equity, right? And agency. And so the publications are about, but broadly, there's one bucket, which is decolonizing design, but that is still an equity issue, right? Like if you are not white, from Europe or North America, what is design for you? So I write a lot about that, and Black experience in design. Surprisingly, I was working with someone in public health, and we then tried to figure out, one, how could the people in public health use design? And then how could we use design methods or the way that people design to get the public to talk more about their health experience? So that's another pocket of publications. Then there's a third pocket of publications, which is related to education, right? And how can we create engaging and empowering educational experiences using design? So there's that Frerian work that I did in Moruga. There's a project that I just did in Raleigh that we haven't published yet, but where we were doing like a game-based workshop and tied in a little Afrofuturism, and again got the children to look at the problems that they wanted to address. And then they built a board game to solve the issue that they wanted to address. And then in doing that, they learned about 3D printing and all kinds of camera stuff. And we were introducing them to a whole lot of STEM techniques as they address that issue. And then the last body of research is about social change, right? And that's related to things like the work with the cities, addressing social problems, and figuring out how can we use the way that we think as designers to make big change in the world. And so then I guess that then is a segue into what this book is about. It is called Design Social Change, right? And it's organized in like around three big.
Hold it up for us.
Yes, I'll hold it up for you. Yes. So it's not available yet, actually. This is like, I have 2 copies. I guess maybe the publisher has 2 copies. It'll be released on November 28th, right? And it's a very Caribbean, colorful book.
I love the colors and the layout. I saw like the peaks of it. I was like, this is really, really cool.
It's very colorful. Actually, this image behind me on Zoom is in the book, and it's actually here, right? And this artwork is by Che Lovelace, who is.
I knew it was Che. I saw colors like Che. I'm gonna wait to ask her offline, but I'm so glad.
No. It is Che Lovelace's artwork.
Yeah.
I love Che's work. During the pandemic.
Can't afford it.
I can't afford it anymore. There was a point where I could have, and I think at some point more recently I asked Che about the work, and he probably laughed at me and says, "You can't afford this stuff anymore." Right? But I mean, I used his artwork with permission as my Zoom background throughout the entire pandemic, because I just needed to see images like this. This painting is actually Laventil, right? And I needed to see images like that. And when we were looking for art for the book, the publisher showed me art maybe like by 20 different people. I was like, but none of this work is as exciting as Che's work anyway. So I wrote to Che and said, okay, can we use some of these, some of your images in this book? And he said, yeah, of course. You can't buy it, but you can use it. So yeah, I'm very happy to have Che's work featured in this book. So in the book, what I'm asking people to do is first see themselves, understand who they are, their identities, to build so that they have that awareness of self. Then I want them to see the world around them. And again, understanding that they have agency and the world doesn't just happen to them. They can see what is going on in this world around them, and they can figure out what strategies they're going to use to address this world. And then in the third part of the book, I'm asking them to envision better futures, so it's the third part. That's what we do as designers. We imagine future things. And so I'm kind of encouraging people to imagine the change that they want to see happen, and then just work on that, right? Build a community around them and address those things that they want to change in the world. Don't just let the world happen to you. Design the change that you want to see. And that's what that book is about.
Wow. Like, I can't tell you how much you really embody the vision and the work of Whistle, and myself, as, founder of Carib Network. I think I would love to kind of round things out by saying, like, I asked you some tough questions because I felt you could handle it. However, I want us to kind of like to roll out for anyone listening. They have an idea. What are three actionable or tangible things you would say to someone listening to you right now who has an idea and not sure how to proceed, like not sure what next step should look like, and they feel kind of like overwhelmed?
Okay, you want 3 things. I could probably think of 100 things, but let me try to keep it simple. So one thing that they could think about is who is their community, right? Because we actually don't make change alone. We don't do design alone. That idea of that solitary designer or solitary artist person working by themselves is a bit of a myth. So, they could figure out who are they doing this work with. And that with could take different roles. It could be that with is actually working with them, or that with is just there for moral support, right? But you kind of need a community around you. There's an actual page in the book that says "Stronger Together," and it's related to that. So that's one strategy. Another strategy that's really important is this prototyping thing that we do as designers that not everybody does. So I mean, you have your idea for change. What does even a small version of this change look like? And can you try this idea out? So an example is when I was working with the last city that I worked with, I said that we had this idea of a phased program to get people off the streets. And we created a brochure, and that brochure ended up being the prototype, or we did maybe a brochure and a poster. And that ends up being the prototype that we could then take into the room and show people, what do you think about this idea? Another city that I was working with, they wanted to do some work with children. They wanted to create an education program for children. And the prototype that they did was that they created this one class, just a 20-minute class. And they ran the 20-minute class, and then they asked people for feedback. So, don't let your idea just stew in your head for a long, long time and not do anything about it. Just figure out, okay, I could do a 1% type quantity of this idea as a real prototype and just ask people what they think, right? So my next thing that I would recommend is just about action. Do something, right, with your idea. Let me see, what is my third my third recommendation then would be, and this one is a bit of a cliche, I suppose, don't fall in love with your idea, right? Understand that your idea is going to be in flux. You're presenting this idea to the world and to people to be able to get some input from them to make the idea better. But if you are so in love with your idea, you'll just spend all of your energy defending it, or believing that everyone else is wrong and you're right because your idea is amazing, right? And you're not actually going to be able to benefit from everyone else's energy to make this idea better, right? So, I mean, yes, your idea might be good, but you can actually get to a better idea if you listen to people's feedback and are kind of responsive to that, or let people join you in that design process. So that was a couple of things in the last one, but I guess the big idea is don't be so in love with your own idea that you can't hear what other people are saying. And I'll say
I love that. 3 tends to be a really solid number that people kind of latched onto and remember things. So
yes.
Just to recap what you shared, I was taking notes. So it's like, 1, ask yourself, who is your community, right? Who are you doing this work with? And who are the people around you to help support you along the way? 2, create some kind of prototype, test out your idea, have some way of like getting feedback and asking people, what do they think about this idea? And then 3, while doing so, remember, don't be so in love with the idea that that you are unable to want to tweak it, that you're just in defense mode, and just recognize that this idea is going to evolve. It's going to be dynamic, especially if your intent is to actually do good and help people. So
yes, let me share with you something that one child told me in the workshop I did in Moruga. And when this child said this, I was like, okay, you just gave me my PhD, right? Because he was kind of hinting that on a regular day in school, he was a troublemaker and people would laugh at him and all of, so he was a class clown because he was not respected in this ordinary classroom. But he was saying, in this design classroom, I could kind of say what I need to say. And he could say what he needed to say, and not be ashamed of it or not be self-conscious, because he said, actually, the ideas are everybody's ideas, right? Because of the way they all gave, it was like a constant critique. Someone would present an idea and then everyone would give additional feedback to the idea. The student said that, actually, I don't have to be afraid of people laughing at me because everybody owns a little bit of every idea. And, if you remember that in a design process, that it's not really just about your idea, these ideas become kind of collective and belong to a lot of people, then that kind of makes the design process a little bit better.
I love that. I feel like I can ask you so many more questions that are swirling in my head, but I will absolutely stop there because we didn't even intend to keep you for so long. But know that I'm so, so grateful and finally got the chance to be able to do this with you. I want to be able to open the floor to anyone else, Arno, or Alvin, or anyone in the chat. If you have a question that you want to ask Dr. Noel, please, this is the time to do so before she has to go save the world off Zoom.
Yeah, I have one question for you, Lesley-Ann. What would be like the ideal project a designer could lead in the Caribbean? What like the most impactful for you?
So, I mean, when Alvin reached out to me, I think we were talking a little bit about education, and I think that redesigning education and access to education in the Caribbean, I think is really important, right? Because I think that our education, and I mean, I could really only speak for Trinidad, but I actually worked with CXC for a little while, so I kind of know what's going on with maybe Jamaica and some other places, right? But our education was built on colonial education, which was not meant to create to make creative people. It was meant to get people ready for work and, work where they didn't have to think. And so I think that it would be so exciting if people could be developing education around our experiences of living on islands or living near to the beach, or, like different, whether it's urban or rural, or, if there could be more engaging educational experiences that children would benefit a lot from, rather than this more exam focused rote learning that we have in a lot of the islands. So for me, that would be really, really impactful. Of course, there are other projects that people could do, but I think that's the one that I would be most interested in.
And I would want to do that with you.
Yeah, let's do that.
Seriously, as an educator myself, guys, the fact that kids sit in a room on a chair with a desk in front of them, like that model was introduced in the 1800s and is the exact same setup that we continue, right? That we continue to like have as environments of learning, is insanity. Mm-hmm. Think about how much more we know and how much education, like the purposes of education have like, right, gone through the roof. It's not just about putting people in the workforce, and we still are teaching kids the same exact way. It's crazy. Yeah. But anyway.
And unnecessary. And, if we come back to these contexts that I've been working in, Moruga and Mayaro, and, we could have children exploring forests and on the beach and, doing like really exciting things, rather than staying in these hot, terrible classrooms, right?
With a teacher on a podium.
Yes.
Right on a chalkboard.
Yes. Onika has a question. Yeah.
Yeah, Onika has, I think, a question.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm really glad that I could join. I'm sorry I couldn't get here at midday, but I just had a feeling from the email that was shared that this might be something that would be useful to me. And while I'm not quite ready to articulate what the idea is, I do think that the steps that you just listed are so useful. And the fourth one, though I know 3 is like that 1, 2, and 3 is such a way to captivate memory. But that 4th, I think you mentioned action. And, like putting those ideas into action by utilizing those 3 elements. So I'm just wondering, if I wanted to utilize you as a resource, say I'm from Grenada and it's a project that I've been thinking about to bring to the government of Grenada, like if I needed to contact you as a resource or someone who might advise or consult or something to that effect, where could you be reached, and just basically how to get in touch with you to have deeper conversations around having something go from a design idea to being executed?
Well, I'm easy to find and always open for almost any conversation, right? So I mean, you can look for me on Instagram, LinkedIn. My email address is floating around the universe somewhere. But if you just Google me, Lesley-Ann Noel, you'll find some platform that you will be able to connect with me on, and I will respond. Right? Instagram and LinkedIn are the easiest, but there are other ways as well, right? And then the other thing, though, I would say, even not that I don't want to come in and consult for Grenada, but it's like if we all have this capacity, right? And I guess what I'm saying is, yes, I'll be available, and I'm always a little kind of, I don't want to say suspicious, but I think that we kind of put consultants on this like super pedestal. And so at the same time, I want to say that you, Onika Phillips, kind of have the design capacity and power that you might not need an external consultant. But I know how consulting goes in the Caribbean as well.
Yeah, I think it would more be, for me, it's more about those actionable steps. Like for me, it would be like, what's a conversation that I can have around those actionable steps? Because it truly is just an idea. And for me, you know, like, how do I bring in community? Who should I involve? Who should I speak to? What do those steps look like in order to then present to, say, like a minister of education? Those steps is really what I'm interested in speaking to you too, and as a reference point, you know, like Dr. Lesley-Ann Noel of Trinidad has, you know, had these conversations. Dr. Nicole Grimes has had these conversations about metamorphosizing the way we educate and you know, just those something so that it doesn't live in the back of my mind.
Right.
And it becomes
I get it. Yes.
Steps, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I get it. So I mean, yes, reach out to me, right? And really what my comment was about is that, and again, I think that this is connected to colonialism as well, that, you know, it's like we are trained that this expert comes from outside.
Yeah.
And so like jobs don't happen. Like, you know, there's so many places I've worked as a consultant, and I'm almost embarrassed because I'm like, everybody in this room has the capacity, but because the way governments work, it's almost like it's only this outsider who has to be this expert, and we'll only pay the money to this outsider, and you know. So I mean, it's really that comment that I was trying to subtly do, you know.
Yes, I understand. I do. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, because we have that consulting culture, right? But and of course you know, with a last name like Noel, that I'm connected to Grenada as well, right?
I was wondering.
Yes. My father's so both of my grandparents on my father's side are Grenadian. Well, were Grenadians.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Grenada is Trinidad. Thank you.
Yes. Point Fortin is Grenada, and that's where my family is from originally.
Thank you so much for that question. And for those of you who may not know, the Rachel Onika Phillips is a very, very, very celebrated and well-known performing educator and dancer on Broadway, based here in New York. She's the first Grenadian woman on Broadway. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being here so much. And to follow up to your question, I think it's important to note that the next experience that Whistle and CBN is going to have, it's actually going to be a workshop to help people move along this journey with like the idea, like how to like start to bring it together. So you could like look out for that piece as well. And maybe that would be something that would help inform this journey for you.
Sounds good.
Alvin, do you want to take us out and round up the conversation today?
Yeah. I mean, I think so much has been said, and so many insightful thoughts, ideas, methods have been shared. And just to highlight your words, Nicole, I'm very grateful that Lesley-Ann joined us in the conversation to share all of this. And there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done for the region. But every creative, every person, every entrepreneur, change maker, designer can actually do it. And I'm appreciative that she is enabling us to share this message with people, so that it can reach a broader audience and get things moving. You know.
You are our beacon, Dr. Noel.
Yes.
Thank you. I will thank Alvin and Anu and Whistle for this invitation, right? Because I think the work that you all are doing, you as well, Nicole, is really visionary. When I looked up Whistle, I thought, oh wow, this is an exciting proposition. This idea of trying to support people do exciting work in the Caribbean. I think that's really, really necessary. So when you said you are our beacon, I thought you meant Whistle. So I will say that Whistle is kind of also leading and setting a very important path that many of us should follow as well. So thank you.